ego is pretty pervasive in human society, I personally think that ego permeates the entire universe of people wanting to do stuff. And so, while we're on that planet, we of course would like to leave behind a couple of messages. Messages that we were there on their planet. Because we'll know that once we leave, 1,000 years in their future, or let's say 5,000 years in their future, they will reach a similar type of technological advancement as we have today. And then all of a sudden, our once very real visit will have fallen into the realm of myth, of legend, that ancient astronauts were never here on their planet. They were never visited, and anybody who talks about these things is a kook. So we will leave behind these messages. We will help them build certain structures, structures that contain mathematical messages, or structures and texts that do not fit into an ordinary chronological evolution of any given planet, where it's very simple. Any technological evolution, if we, let's say, look at the car, it started out with the Model T, and only today we have the Ford Taurus. Well, if you look at history, and I'm about to show this to you, the further back we go in time, the more Ford Tauruses we encounter, and no Model Ts. Now, from a logical perspective, that makes absolutely no sense. So my argument in my brief introduction here was, or is, that we will become ancient aliens on some distant planet in the distant future. And my question tonight is it possible that if we become ancient aliens on some other planet in the future, that we were visited by extraterrestrials here on Earth thousands of years ago that also gave us a kickstart in the quote-unquote right direction? And the answer is yes. So this is what eventually will happen on another planet. And so now, in order to prove to you that this is exactly what happened here on planet Earth, we're going to take a roller coaster ride around the world to check out some places that, ordinarily speaking, should not exist, yet they're right in front of our faces, and we're not being told the truth about them. So, one additional argument that can be made for the ancient astronaut theory is a concept that I would like you to look up later on tonight, or tomorrow, because we're all going to go party tonight after this. That's what I like to hear. I do need to relax after this, so. Anyway, I would like you to look up a ethnological term which is called a cargo cult. And a cargo cult essentially, and that's a university term. It's an academic term. It's not something, none of the stuff, by the way, that I'm presenting to you tonight, I've pulled out of thin air. Everything is documented, everything can be looked up. You can go and travel to these places, touch them, look at them, find them on the internet, in your library. So, none of this stuff is esoteric. None of this, was given to me by beings on another plane. Because, all that stuff, in my opinion, is total nonsense. So, the term cargo cult essentially means that if a technologically primitive, again, a technologically primitive society comes in contact with a technologically advanced society, over time, the technologically primitive society begins to worship the technologically advanced society. And this has happened throughout history, but especially as one of the most recent examples during the Second World War. When the Americans entered World War II, they all of a sudden had to set up bases in the South Pacific, and as they showed up with their ships, they showed up with everything, and of course, the natives were frightened because this had been the first time that they had made contact with an outside society. And imagine all these warships all of a sudden showing up with their planes and everything else. Naturally, the natives were quite frightened. But after a while, they realized that the soldiers didn't want to do them any harm, and so they started to interact with the Americans. And so, over time, what had happened is that the Americans were quite nice to them and started to give them, cookies and cans of corned beef and all sorts of goods, or, in other words, cargo. And as quickly as the Americans back then appeared on their islands, that's as quickly they disappeared. And so fast forward about 5-10 years, and these ethnologists in California, they wondered, hey, what do you think ever happened to those islanders in the South Pacific? And so they mounted an expedition, and much to their surprise, upon arrival on some of these islands, they found this. They found planes made out of wood and straw on the same airstrips that the Americans had used during their missions and their sorties. And every night, the people would sit on the side with fires, creating runway lights, or they held little wooden boxes pretending to be walkie-talkies. They had rifles made of wood on their backs. And when the ethnologists asked them, what on earth are you doing? They said, well, we're waiting for our gods to return. Now, at the time, they didn't know that the Americans were simply other human beings, not from another planet, not from another dimension, but from halfway around the world, from the United States. Now, another thing I would like you to look up, which goes hand in hand with this, is the John Frum cult. John, as you spell John, and then F-R-U-M. And if anybody wonders what a John Frum cult is, well, very simple. And the John Frum cult today is a religion. It has been taken over by Christians, and John Frum has taken on the role of Jesus. And the reason why the John Frum cult at the time existed, and that's what the ethnologists found out when they asked them, what are you doing? They said, well, we're worshiping, we want John Frum to return to us from the sky. And the reason why they called it John Frum cult is because John is the most popular name in the English language, and we Americans, when we introduce ourselves, we never say, hi, I am Mr. Smith, or I'm Mr. Tsoukalos from so-and-so. I'm Giorgio from, or I'm John from Indiana. I'm John from Idaho. I'm John from California. That is why we have the John Frum cult. So, if something like this can happen in the 1940s and the 1950s, then my argument is cargo cult behavior can take place in the 1940s and 1950s, then the argument is that a cargo cult behavior also took place 5,000 years ago. And here's a bit of a better picture of these. None of these guys knew that, these birds of metal, as they were referred to, had an engine inside. They didn't know how that worked. In fact, in this picture right here, this is a pig that they would sacrifice every night on the bow of this amphibious plane because they wanted to placate the angry bird of metal so he wouldn't howl and scream as much. Now, that does not mean that any of these people are stupid or intellectually inferior. after, this is the pilot right here, after he explained to them and opened up the engine and showed them, this is how it works, they stopped sacrificing the pig immediately. And they were happy that they didn't have to give away food for other things that they, that was just thrown upon them. Oh, and just so you know, this is the origin of my hair. These are my relatives. Now you know the secret. So with these two arguments right now, the cargo cult and us becoming ancient aliens in the future, I will now show you that ancient aliens have been here in the past, and that cargo cult behavior has been going on since times immemorial, because we were visited by technologically more advanced beings. By the way, I just want to say one thing very clearly right now, and probably I'll repeat this throughout the whole lecture, but gods do not exist. I'm often misquoted, and and obviously, and some people over here, the avid viewers of Ancient Aliens and stuff like this, or even read my magazine and stuff like that. So some people are more familiar with the stuff that I talk about than others, but at times, when people say, oh, so you subscribe to the extraterrestrial idea, and that means you worship gods, or you worship extraterrestrials, and you don't believe in God, you're an atheist, and things like that. And to me, it's like, no. I don't know how you got that, but it's way bigger than that. Because just because you subscribe to an idea that suggests extraterrestrials doesn't mean that an idea like God cannot exist. Now, do I subscribe to the God of the Old Testament? Of course not. Because whoever or whatever was described, as I will show you, in the Old Testament, for example, in all the other holy books, was anything but God. It was a misunderstood, misinterpreted, flesh and blood extraterrestrial space traveler that came here and, dabbled around in mankind's development. And so the idea, but the thing is that there's still this larger, you want to call it force that we all belong to, because if you take a piece of skin and you put it underneath an electron microscope and you go deeper and deeper and deeper at the very, very core, everything